This week, on The Record, the Supreme Court expands presidential power to engage in criminal conduct without consequence. Why the high court ruling makes it much less likely Donald Trump will ever see the inside of a courtroom again. The fate of Illinois' assault weapons ban. The big debate's coming soon. And she's a Republican publicly opposing the state's abortion ban. Why Jamie Corley wants to become Secretary of State. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. In Missouri, the Secretary of State is the chief elections officer. Politicians to hold that office have gone on to become the governor, a member of Congress, or a U.S. senator. The incumbent, Jay Ashcroft, is now running for governor, leaving that coveted open seat up for grabs in a presidential election year. A crowded field of candidates like House Speaker Dean Plocher, State Senators Mary Elizabeth Coleman and Denny Hoskins, Reps Adam Schwadron and Shane Scholler are jockeying for pole position. After years of GOP infighting inflamed from the far right, could there be an opening for a moderate Republican? And Jamie Corley is now on the record. It's good to have you back with us this time as a candidate. Last time you were proposing a ballot initiative petition around abortion, even sued the Secretary of State's office.
That's right.
You seem intimately familiar with part of that office. Do you want to see the ballot initiative petition process change at all should you become Secretary of State?
So you're exactly right. The Secretary of State oversees the ballot initiative process, and the ballot initiative process is used by Missourians all the time. It's a constitutional right we have to change the Constitution or change statute, usually when we are fed up with what's happening in Jefferson City. So you can imagine that it's been used quite a bit recently. I believe in the ballot initiative process to change laws. It is a check on power. And it is something that Missourians, I think, hold quite sacred as this way to execute their own ability to create laws. My opponents feel very differently about that. My opponents have led, I'm running against 4 people in the current and former legislators. They believe that citizens should not have the power to self-govern.
Well, one of them is House Speaker Dean Plocher. Mm-hmm. He used a similar word you used, sacred, to describe the Constitution itself, and for that reason came to a different conclusion, that it shouldn't be so easy to change it. Right now, you just need 50% of support across the state to change it after a tedious process putting that question on the ballot. But he wants to just raise that threshold. Would you take any action in that direction to make it harder to change the Constitution?
No, I wouldn't. I am a firm believer that the ballot initiative process, we've had this for 100 years, is important as a check on legislative power. It's not surprising to me that someone in the legislature wants to embolden their own power at the expense of the people. I will say that IP reform in the legislature is dead. You know, it didn't pass this year and it didn't pass last year. But that makes the Secretary of State's office even more important on this issue because my opponents are going to use their position as Secretary of State to essentially enact a de facto IP reform. How can you do that? Well, I experienced this firsthand. The Secretary of State writes ballot language. You can write it in a way that is going to trigger very long, very expensive, convoluted court processes. So there are ways to make the process much clunkier, much more difficult. That's not something I'm interested in doing.
It always surprises me when people who don't believe in government run for government jobs or get into a government job and then try to drag things down. Now, there was a political motive there. You're a rare breed in that you're a pro-choice Republican.
You know, yeah, I would push back on that term.
The term?
I would, because when I started all of this work, I thought I was pro-choice because I disagree, like Donald Trump does, with total abortion bans. No, we have no exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. I was told quite clearly from the pro-choice groups that I do not qualify to be in their club.
So you're somewhere between, you don't like a total ban, you want there to be a more moderate approach. You had pushed this initiative petition process. There is a ballot initiative on the ballot this November that would overturn Missouri's total abortion ban. Will you be supporting it?
I really have concerns with that ballot initiative. And it's very frustrating to me as somebody who really wants the abortion ban removed from law. It is dangerous for families. It is dangerous for women. But it has to be replaced with something that's not going to do further damage in other ways.
So you're saying it's a tough choice. It's a choice you'll still have to make at some point. I wonder, though, about there was a different option on the table that would have been more permissive. Do you prefer this one to that option?
They had, 13 ballot initiatives?
Some of the pro-choice people that were pushing this
Right.
were very upset that,
Yes.
that this was the final option and not something more permissive.
I am totally against total, revision of any regulation on abortion, which we would have gone, what you're talking about with the one that was totally permissive, we would have gone to the left of California. That would have never passed in California, and I don't believe that we should be legalizing elective third-term abortions. I completely disagree with that.
So it sounds like you're saying you do prefer the one that we have to the one that we could have had, but still don't. You still have issues with it.
I still have major issues. I would have preferred the one that my organization, put forward, which was 12 weeks with exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother.
People often say that elections, you should be easy to vote, hard to cheat. I'm going to break those down one by one. Is there anything specifically you can do to make it easier to vote in Missouri?
So simple voting, secure elections is kind of my tagline of my campaign. So we have early voting now in Missouri, 2 weeks. We used to have just voting on election day. That's something that I would keep, right? That is 2 weeks of early voting, makes it easier for working people, people who maybe they're out of town for a primary.
But we already have that.
Right.
Is there anything you would do to make it easier to vote?
So I think education, making sure a lot of people, as I've gone around the state, people don't even know where to register to vote, how to register to vote, that what the election days are, what people think that they have same-day registration. They don't.
Some of your opponents in the Republican primary are suggesting we should go away from electronic vote counting machines. These are tabulators. They're not connected to the internet.
Correct.
They just cycle through and use mechanics to register which people, which ballots went through and which candidates they were selected for. You worked in tech some. What would it do to the election process, the counting process, if we were to remove technology from the vote counting?
So I'm going to be very clear that I am totally against hand counting ballots as the sole way to count votes.
That was the way to rig elections back in the day.
100%.
Many years ago.
We need, as a Secretary of State, my goal would be to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in our election system. Hand counting ballots does not support eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. However, again, we want to make sure that our elections are secure. So what does that look like? The way we have it now, which is paper ballots that are, like you said, electronically tabulated. We want to deliver election results on election day, but they're never connected to the internet. We want to keep a paper trail. By law, you hand count elections when the margin is within 5%. So it's a great auditing tool, but it cannot be the sole counting tool.
So we started out talking about easier to vote, harder to cheat. It would be easier to cheat if we went to paper ballots and hand counting only, harder to cheat if we stay with electronics, because that's just, it's just human error comes into factor.
Electronics that are not connected to the internet.
Correct. Jamie Corley, running for Secretary of State, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Our expanded interview with Jamie Corley is up right now on KSDK.com, where you can watch that. Democrats rally behind the president after a disastrous debate. What the Illinois governor has to say about President Biden's performance. Democrats are in damage control with a president plunging in the polls. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker joined several Democratic governors this week in an emergency meeting at the White House after President Biden's disastrous debate performance.
I think that there's a healthy discussion going on within the Democratic Party. We're not a cult like the MAGA Republicans. We tolerate dissent, and we think it's good for democracy to have this conversation. And for me anyway, my word is my bond. I honor my commitments. Joe Biden is going to be our nominee. unless he decides otherwise. And so I think that there's a healthy conversation that will happen with the president, I hope, expressing what he intends to do going forward in the campaign and reassuring everybody that this is the right course to make sure that we stay the course with him.
Pritzker's name has been floated as a potential replacement if Biden does back out. In other news, Illinois' ban on assault weapons will remain in place at least for now. The U.S. Supreme Court kicked pending challenges to the law back down to lower courts. The ban was enacted in 2023 in response to that mass shooting at a 4th of July parade in Highland Park in 2022. In Missouri, Governor Mike Parson marked up the budget with his veto pen. Parson slashed $1 billion from the state's overall spending plan. Some of the cuts included slashing financial aid for veterans, education program for low-income kids, and blocking gun detection surveillance programs from schools. In a highly controversial ruling this week, the U.S. Supreme Court said presidents are entitled to some immunity. The courts say that Donald Trump is immune for prosecution for official conduct related to his presidential duties while in office, but also blocked many of the jury instructions for other private acts. Liberal justices dissented, saying the precedent is troubling for democracy. The court's conservative majority opinion says the president must be able to carry out his duties without fear of prosecution.
We all vote, and Congress can impeach. And that's what the Constitution says should happen. The idea that a president can be convicted in a local courtroom in Missouri might open the door to all kinds of chaos. I think the court wants to close that door.
The rest of that case now heads back to a lower court to decide what is an official act and what is not. When we come back, we have more analysis on the political impact of that Supreme Court decision with Anita Mannion. Welcome back. Our political analyst, Anita Mannion, is here with us to look at this wild week or so of politics. There's been so much. Let's start with the Supreme Court. They're handing down this decision saying that presidents do have immunity around official acts, and that can include a number of things. The courts are going to figure out exactly what that means down the road. But for now, it looks like the court is expanding the scope of what a president can do, even if that dabbles into otherwise criminal territory. What impact does that idea have on the mind of voters, do you think, in this presidential election year?
Well, I certainly think polling indicates that Americans don't think that presidents should just have sort of carte blanche immunity. Now, it depends. If you insert the name Trump in there, then you maybe get more support for immunity from Republicans. But on the whole, we do have this idea that no one's above the law. So there is some consternation among some about that decision.
Yeah, I asked one Missouri Republican who could be a delegate to the RNC this year, do you support this decision? Absolutely, great decision, he said. I said, would you trust President Biden with that kind of power? Well, no.
Right.
So it does change depending on which candidate you give that power to.
It does. And the court, as they said, this is a decision for the ages, so they would argue this is going to protect President Biden from prosecution if Trump gets the next term. But it certainly broadens the scope of what presidents are protected from. And also another aspect is it says that you cannot even introduce that into evidence in a court case about something else. Mm-hmm. So that will affect, Trump's upcoming cases and cases for other future presidents.
Yeah, it's certainly a unique situation, something we just haven't seen spelled out at the Supreme Court ever before. But the court did say something too. They said the framers, the founding fathers, envisioned a White House and an executive branch that wasn't feeble. They wanted it to be vigorous and active. Well, we all saw the debate from President Biden about a week and a half ago. Just what kind of issues did he step into with this faltering presentation?
Yeah, we saw a pretty immediate response from folks as they were watching the debate, especially when he says, we killed Medicare or whatever, confusing some things. He seemed to do better as the debate went on, but not only did it reinforce a narrative that's been out there for some time about President Biden's age and his capacity, but it also overrode anything that, Donald Trump said in the debate that could have been problematic or behaviors that are problematic. No one's really discussing those because the focus is all on Biden.
I wonder if the anxiety is higher now because we're so much closer to the actual election. 2 years ago, President Biden was on the White House lawn and looked out into the crowd for a dead congresswoman. And questions arose back then, but people didn't really seem to take it. Maybe they wrote it off as a one-off thing. And it was easier to forget. But if you go back and look at it, these are not one-off instances.
Yeah, and we've seen some other footage recently of people, and some of it has been edited to make Biden look worse, but of, moments where he seems to have frozen, sort of like we saw with Mitch McConnell not that long ago. This was also a very unusual debate in terms of the timing. This is the earliest debate we've had. They've always been in September or later. And part of the reason the Biden campaign wanted that is because they wanted to squash that narrative and have him come out and perform like he did the State of the Union and say, see, he's vigorous, he's on top of it, and it really backfired.
As fate would have it, in the course of our reporting this week, a retired school teacher walked up to our news cameras as we were reporting about the RNC and Missouri delegates. She's a lifelong Democrat. Here's what she had to say about her confidence in President Biden after that debate.
I am definitely a diehard Democrat and very, very still supportive of President Biden. The policies and the actions that he's taken in the last 4 years and the people that he's put in place around him, I think that will keep the next 4 years going as smoothly.
Did you have any pause or hesitation when you saw his debate performance?
Absolutely. We all did. The country did. But I also saw him the next day, full of vigor and a strong voice, and still the Biden that we've known the last 4 years.
On a teleprompter, though.
Granted, but his voice was strong, and he's still giving us the democratic beliefs that we've come to enjoy these last 4 years.
So there you have it. That's at least one person, one anecdote, a Democrat who is still sticking with Biden, even though she's acknowledging the concerns there. How widespread do you think this panic is? Is it just the elected Democrats, the donors, or the base? How many Democrats do you think are freaked out right now?
I think a lot of people are freaked out right now, not just about Biden's ability to lead. I think, a lot of them probably still think the Biden administration would do a fine job, but his ability to win is now really in question. And that's kind of the number one concern. And I think when Nancy Pelosi kind of opened the door to that, that allowed others to come out and say it. But even in the heat of the debate, if you were watching your social media or getting texts from folks like I was, I think that concern from voters was real and immediate.
Yeah, one question, one test I think that voters might ask is, could 2024 Joe Biden win the 2020 primary? Could he do it today? Could he do what he did back then? Those debates were pretty rough for him. So let me ask the question this way. What would an open convention look like? Should he step aside and a whole bunch of Democrats show interest in that presidential ambition? What could that look like come August?
In one way, it could be really energizing. It could draw a lot of attention to the convention. It could let some, up-and-comers have their moment in the sun. And another way, they would rather, if he did step aside, which I think is not that likely to happen, but an anointment of someone like Kamala Harris, which seems to be who a lot of people, including donors, President Biden and others, seem to be saying, well, if that happened, we would coalesce around her. So it'll be interesting to see if he steps aside how that might work.
Missouri Democrats have their own primary coming up, and just next week on this program, you're going to see Mike Hamra and Crystal Quade debate. As we preview that, what are some things you're looking for? These two candidates haven't had as much exposure as the Republicans. They're a longer shot bid to win in November just because Republicans seem to do better in Missouri than the Democrats have in recent years. What are you looking for? How would you evaluate the winner of a Democratic primary debate in a race like this?
Yeah, in primary debates, broadly, both parties have the same platform. So it's finding those nuances of where you might differ on policy or think about how things should be in your presumptive term, but also who connects with the voters. Who do they feel is authentic and will fight for them in Missouri and has a fighting chance to win?
All right, we look forward to that. Anita Mania, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
We're back in a moment.
Before we go, a programming note. Next week, a big debate right here. Democrats Mike Hamra and House Minority Leader Crystal Quade are running for governor in Missouri. They'll debate in a special episode of The Record. Then, July 24, we'll host another debate with candidates running in the Republican primary for governor. I'll be one of your moderators alongside Carol Daniel from PBS and Caitlin Canute from the local NBC station in Kansas City. 3 podiums are prepared for Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft, Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, and State Senator Bill Eigel. So far, Ashcroft and Eigel have confirmed to debate live July 24th at 7 o'clock. We hope to bring you a lot of tough questions and help you learn more about those candidates and see how they would approach the job, and will approach the debate like something of a job interview. You can tune in and watch how they do. We hope you'll tune into that debate next week. Until then, we're off the record.